I'm Maria Titizian, and you're listening to Examining the Context, a podcast by EVN Report. Armenia recently hosted the second edition of Yerevan Dialogue in partnership with France, India, and Poland. Now, on the surface, the event appeared to be a continuation of Armenia's soft power diplomacy. But if one were to dig a little deeper, something more strategic could perhaps start to take place, the potential formation of a new kind of alliance, one that reimagines Armenia's security architecture through the lens of what's known as securitized minilateralism. What would a strategic alignment between Armenia, France, India, and Poland look like? What do these four countries, each with distinct regional goals, stand to gain from working together? And is this the beginning of a new security paradigm for Armenia? Joining me today is Dr. Nerses Kopalyan, political scientist, international security expert, and author of EVN Report's monthly security briefing. Welcome to the program, Nerses.
Great to be here.
You introduced this I want to call it novel, but perhaps it's not a novel term, securitized minilateralism in May's security report. Can you please explain, first of all, what this concept means in practical terms, especially for a country like Armenia?
So the concept may be somewhat novel for Armenia or for the region, but in of itself, minilateralism has been around for some time. And the concept has been utilized to address some of the governance failures that we have seen at the multilateral global level or at the regional level. And so in Armenia's case, I utilize the concept of minilateralism through a securitized domain because what we see when we look at minilateralism, this basically means when you have sort of, the smallest possible number of countries that come together to solve a specific set of issues, right? So that's why it's known as minilateralism. And so when countries have, for example, a group of countries that have shared interests, okay, but not shared values, that's secondary, okay, they have shared interests, and there's a collective action problem. They come together to solve problems that are specific and that basically aligns with all of their interests on a specific issues. So minilateralism is a mechanism of a group of countries, right, that could come together to address problems that are in all of their strategic interests. So it's not sort of these alliances that are based on values or a multitude of factors, but they tend to be topic specific or issue specific. So in this context, right, Armenia's fundamental issue remains security. And so when we take minilateralism and apply it through a security lens, we have sort of a securitized concept of minilateralism. And what the concept generally does is that it allows for some form of like a multilateral engagement, right? But in a way that's structured where it allows flexibility, or it allows for innovative and strategic approaches. It's not as rigid as being part of an international institution or a specific arrangement. So for example, if you're a member of NATO, right, there's an agenda, there are rules, there are articles. It's very, very complex. And you have a lot of members. Minilateralism has the smallest number of members. It's topic or issue specific, so it's much easier to navigate and address the problem at hand. Also, minilateral engagements are not based on ideological alignment or, as I noted, shared values. This is very important.
So you could come together around a specific topic and then completely disagree around something else, but this is the whole idea.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But of course, the countries have to have at least relationships that are at the level of strategic partnerships, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't be sort of two countries that are antagonistic but agree on a specific issue being part of a minilateral arrangement. That's very, very difficult to do. But overarchingly, right, this is very, very important because what it does, it provides an alternative platform, an alternative mechanism to basically coalesce countries around the specific issue where there's such a robust alignment of interest that is conducive, right, to their strategic goals in forming this minilateral engagement. In this month's security briefing, I provide examples of this, right? We have, for example, like the quadrilateral security dialogue between Japan, India, US, and Australia. And this is designed, for example, to contain China, right? So all four of these countries on this specific issue, they work together. Right. Now, of course, US, Japan, and Australia are also part of NATO, and they have their own arrangements. India isn't part of that, right? But on this specific issue, these four could work together to address given problems. There's been a lot of talks recently, for example, about the Abraham Accords, right? That is an example of minilateralism, where the United States has created a platform where Arab countries can normalize relations with Israel, and then they could deepen relations on those specific issues. So we see that minilateralism allows flexibility and innovative problem solving without having to form these very grand, large, multilateral institutions or organizations.
Let me just interrupt you for a second, Nerses. These groupings that you mentioned in the briefing, these are relatively new. Or do they go back decades, others?
You've had some historical examples of this, but generally, as practice, it's fairly new because, until about maybe 20 years ago, there was an understanding that multilateral large institutions work for global or regional governance. But when you saw this wasn't addressing a lot of the issues that these large international intergovernmental organizations were supposed to solve, countries basically started coming together to address these problems. That's why another term we use for minilateralism is the notion of loose multilateralism. Right. So it's at a smaller level and it's more sort of surgical and specific on a given topical area.
Right. It's like Mercosur, for example, right? The four South American countries, like trade agreements, also play a role.
Right. So that is a regional arrangement. Right. The level of institutionalization will qualify whether it's a multilateral engagement or a minilateral arrangement, but definitely begins as a minilateral arrangement, and then it can eventually become a multilateral structure.
Got it. So why do you think the timing is right for Armenia to pursue this type of strategic alignment with these three countries? And you call it the Quartet, right? France, India, Poland, and Armenia.
So what we did is I put together sort of a matrix of a set of bilateral relations, right? We have Franco-Polish relations, you have Franco-Indian relations, and then we have India-Polish relations. And then you have
Armenia
with all of these countries, right? So you have a set of bilateral relations. And all of these countries in of themselves have very close relations with Armenia. So India-Armenia relations within the domain of security are very, very robust. Armenia purchases most of their weaponry from India. India is now more than willing to invest in Armenia's security architecture. So you have a close alignment of interests on this specific issue. Now, some might say, well, geopolitically, India doesn't really support any antagonistic behavior against Russia, for example, or containing Russia. Be that as it may, this is not a grand global multilateral phenomenon we're talking about, right? It is a specific minilateral arrangement to address security considerations in the South Caucasus. So from India's perspective, right, as far as their strategic interests are concerned, Armenia is one, an important strategic security partner. Two, considering India's recent conflict with Pakistan and Azerbaijan's and Turkey's alignment with Pakistan, it is conducive to India's strategic interest to closely align with Armenia when it comes to regional security. Same with France, right? France was one of the first actors to play a very important role in Armenia's security architecture. And so France has invested exponentially in Armenia's security. And at the same time, when we look at, for example, India-France relationships, France has been instrumental in supporting India's modernization of its weapons systems, its military-industrial complex. And so Franco-Indian relations, specifically in the domain of military-industrial developments, military-industrial complex, joint cooperation, Indo-Pacific collaboration are very, very robust. So what you're seeing is basically alignment of strategic interests, right, between these three countries that are commensurate with the goals that they have. So if Armenia's regional interests, France's regional interests, and India's regional interests align, this basically provides the impetus and the foundations to developing a minilateral arrangement.
Also Poland.
Now, Poland here comes into the picture as a new actor. And this is why I left.
Poland?
That's a very good question. So when we look at sort of the broader security architecture that we're trying to develop for Armenia, we understand regional actors matter, right? And when we look at the global level, we understand that the United States remains the most powerful international force and the basic deciding actor, if it so chooses, to alter configurations. We see that France and the United States have exceptionally close security relations because both are members of NATO, so on and so forth. And then when we look at Europe collectively and specifically Eastern Europe, as far as the United States is concerned, Poland forms the cornerstone of America's and NATO's security architecture in Europe. So Poland is a fundamentally important security and a defense actor in Europe. And in that context, considering the growing relationship between Armenia and Poland, and the deepening of relations between the two countries. The fact that Poland's president visited Armenia last year, and it had an antagonistic response from Azerbaijan, it created all this sort of, political discord. The fact that recently you had a delegation from Poland visiting Armenia, we see that there's a mutual alignment of interest, and Poland has important strategic interests in the South Caucasus that align with Armenia. Now, again, France's strategic interests, India's strategic interests, and Poland's strategic interests might differ. These are different points. But the fact that being part of a unilateral arrangement will allow them to advance those interests, therein lies a secret. And as far as Poland is concerned, right, Poland's greatest threat is Russia. And so Poland has a strategic interest in advancing its toolkit and establishing a close relationship with Armenia that is viewed by the United States, by much of the European Union, by France as being a potential cornerstone for transatlantic interests. Poland's interests become aligned within that context. So when we look at sort of, the diversity and the complexity of these issues coming and basically consolidating around a solid set of interests that are mutually reinforcing, Poland starts making sense. So at the same time, France and Poland signed the Nancy Treaty. And this basically further integrates their security arrangement with one another with specific clause pertaining to security guarantees and further collaboration, etc., etc. So the same security arrangements that France has, for example, with Germany, right, with Spain, with Italy, it now has it with Poland. And so consider the fact that France is Armenia's closest European ally, and that the fact that France has given Poland this very important and close status, it makes all the sense for Armenia to build this minilateral relationship with Poland, who is a very close ally of its biggest ally, as I noted, and also a very important actor for the United States. So within the domain of Armenia's strategic interest, it makes all the sense for Poland to be integrated into this. And at the same time, we've seen the enhancement and growth of Polish-India relations.
Right, that was going to be my next question, because so far everything makes sense. I just don't understand the Polish-Indian connection.
Right. And so this is, again, so this is part of something that's being developed. And India understands also that because it is becoming a rising power and that it is slowly having geopolitical interests, where in the past
it didn't.
It didn't, but now it does, right? Its presence in the South Caucasus also entails India's growing influence. And the recent visit of Prime Minister Modi to Poland was a very, very important indicator. Modi could have visited any other East European country. He chose Poland.
Why?
Because, as I noted, Poland is important to the Western and American transatlantic security architecture. India is becoming a close partner with the United States, with the West, in containing China. And so within this broad partnership, if a given country is the cornerstone of that security architecture, it makes all the sense to enhance relations with that country. And this is precisely what India and Poland are doing. So the signing of a India-Polish strategic partnership and discussions of collaboration in military-industrial complex, development in cybersecurity capabilities, et cetera, these are basically on the surface stuff that suggests there's more going on and developing behind the scenes. So the enhancement of Polish-India relations, the enhancement and deepening of Polish-French relations, and the fact that Armenia has close relations with all three, the matrix of sets of bilateral relations, when these are basically consolidated around a singular framework, this provides the impetus for developing a unilateral securitized arrangement.
But what could be some of the possible challenges or friction points among these different bilateral configurations and then the quartet, as you call it?
Well, if we were talking about developing a multilateral institutionalized arrangement, there would have been quite a few. But this is not what we're doing, right? We're talking about a minilateral arrangement that is specific to a set of security configurations. So if you were, for example, going to say, 4 of these countries should come together and form a multilateral institutional arrangement that doesn't just only address security, obviously. It has everything from economics, sharing of technological information, so on and so forth. There could be problems because France and Poland are sanctioning Russia, while India will refuse to participate in such sanctions. Armenia also cannot participate in those sanctions, right? So on and so forth. So if we were talking about a multilateral institutionalized arrangement, most definitely you have points of friction. But because this is a minilateral arrangement on a specific security matter, the frictions that could potentially be there, this is why I spoke of flexibility. It allows you to address those where this arrangement doesn't contradict or conflict the other interests that the given country might have. So this flexibility is fundamental, and it allows for strategic acuity in addressing the problem at hand.
Okay, so you talked about, each country has its own reasons for engaging. What does Armenia, other than its position, say, uniquely offer to France, India, or Poland as a security partner in this minilateral arrangement?
So the question, again, presupposes a multilateral arrangement. In a minilateral arrangement, it's not a question of what one partner offers to the other. It's a question of if all of them being part of the same arrangement, does it advance your strategic interests, right? So what Armenia offers is Armenia serves as the cornerstone in the South Caucasus for the interests of all of these three other members within the Quartet to advance and strengthen their interests in the region. So Armenia provides a platform, Armenia provides the physical presence, right? And Armenia allows for the mutual adjustment of interest to advance their strategic goals. So
does Armenia have the sophistication to do that?
It could develop definitely the sophistication. It has the sophistication to deepen its relations with Poland, right? At the moment, it had the sophistication to robustly enhance its relations with France, and it had the sophistication to continue to grow its defense cooperation with India. And so, if you could take these separate bilateral relations and align it into a minilateral arrangement, right? If you have the sophistication at the bilateral level, working with these partners, right, it should not be that difficult to put together what we're talking about. And so if we were starting from scratch, your point will be well taken that does Armenia have the sophistication? But you're not building from scratch. What you're doing is you're taking a set of existing, right, structural relations and saying, okay, what is the common theme in all of these relationships in the matrix that could be aligned? And this is why we speak of a securitized minilateralism.
Right. I had a bunch of questions, but now after hearing you explain it further, it would refer more to a multilateral arrangement. But just, for the sake of mental exercise, how does this proposed Quartet alliance align with or diverge from existing multilateral formats? Does it matter? Like, for example, EU's Eastern Partnership, the OSCE, cooperation with NATO, and so on.
Right. Yeah, it does not create contradictions.
At all,
and this is why it's very, very important, right? Because, for example, you see sets of other minilateral arrangements where United Arab Emirates and Israel, right, like the Negev Forum, work together to address climate change or water shortages. But in the domain of geopolitics, these countries obviously have a lot of disagreements, right? But on that specific issue, they're able to work together. Okay, a very simple example. So in this context, if we're talking about the security interests, the defense cooperation interests of all of the four countries involved, right? This doesn't conflict, for example, with Poland's obligations to NATO, or France's obligations to the European Union, right? Or India's obligations to its responsibilities in Southeast Asia, so on and so forth. And this is why minilateralism is so crucial, because you can tailor it, right? It can be customized to address problem areas without conflicting with other areas. And that is why, whereas, these grand coalitions could create problems. For example, if Armenia wants to join the European Union, it has to leave the Eurasian Economic Union. Understandable. These are very broad, large, multilateral structures. Minilateralism doesn't do that. And this is why, considering Armenia's acute security environment, minilateralism offers a very flexible and a strategically acute mechanism of addressing some of our problems.
But this minilateral framework could not address or handle crises. For example, an escalation with Azerbaijan or some other regional threat.
It depends on the set of arrangements. That's why we use the word arrangements, right? It depends on the set of arrangements that define the minilateral structure. For example, France has a minilateral arrangement with Cyprus and Greece with respect to Turkey on maritime concerns, right? And what of those terms are, and the arrangement is, each partner acts accordingly. And so if, for example, part of the understanding of this minilateral arrangement is that France, Poland, and India agree that it is in their strategic interest to have stability in the South Caucasus for whatever reasons, right? India wants the specific corridor we discuss in the article. Poland needs stability because that basically curtails Russia's growing influence. France wants stability because he views Armenia as a younger strategic partner and an important defense ally for whatever reasons, right? Let's say all three countries, right, prefer, and it's commensurate with their strategic interest, to have stability in the region. And let's say Azerbaijan disrupts that. So an important part of the minilateral arrangement would be that in times of crisis, these partners would assist or support Armenia on X, Y, and Z conditions. This isn't the same as security guarantees or sending troops or whatever, right? But the level of diplomatic pressure, for example, that a combined Franco-Polish-Indian
Armenian
a wave internationally can be applied to offer support for Armenia is very different than Armenia going to each bilateral partner and one by one saying, hey, can you do this at the UN? Or can you? So operating as a bloc, for example, as a minilateral bloc to support Armenia's interests.
And there could be several minilateral blocs depending on the issue, right? It could be economic, in this case, it's security,
very common.
defense.
Yeah, the Scandinavian countries do this, right? The Baltics kind of do this. You know, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg for the longest time, the notion of Benelux is an example of a minilateral arrangement where they group together to advance their interests within the European Union. So you have a lot of these structures throughout.
Okay. So if this vision of a securitized quartet, let's say, were realized, what would success, in your estimation, look like 5 years from now?
Well, one, it'll obviously provide Armenia an important layer of deterrence against Azerbaijan, right? When Baku looks at Armenia, they view it as basically a weaker opponent or enemy that they could coerce, or they could basically use their asymmetrical capabilities, the power of disparity, to impose their terms and therefore bully Armenia around. But when you're part of a unilateral arrangement, when Azerbaijan looks and says, oh, you know, they have a set of arrangements where if I do X, the response from these other powerful countries will be Y, that changes the calculus in Baku. So it's one thing to be by yourself, hoping that your bilateral partners will come to your assistance. It's another to have an established securitized arrangement where in times of crisis, you will get assistance. This fundamentally alters how Azerbaijan looks at the situation. Also at the diplomatic level, but it gives you a lot of clout. Because if you're part of that basically arrangement, at the international level, at the international institutional level, whether it's the UN or whether it's in the European Union or whatever the case might be, it gives you important partners who have vested interest in you because they're part of an arrangement with you. And so this is why these kinds of arrangements matter. Now, 5 years from now, what could this possibly look like, assuming we're able to put something together? And the propensity of putting something together is very, very high. Let me just note that as well. Capacity for training, right? Armenia, for example, needs layered air defense. Okay, as part of an arrangement, France could offer that support and training. Okay, advanced mountainous training. Indians excel at this. For example, India could offer that. Training of territorial defense forces. Poland excels at that. Right? These are three examples. Or let me give another example. An important part of Franco-Polish strategic partnership is that India has a lot of Soviet weaponry, because throughout the Cold War, much of its weapons were from the Soviet Union. So they're Russo-Soviet weapons until India started developing their indigenous capabilities of production. One of the things that Poland has offered India is that because Poland has experience in this, they will support India in maintaining and refitting the Soviet systems into more modern military capabilities. So what Armenia could gain from Poland, aside from territorial defense forces, for example, is its capacity. Where right now, if or in the past you were dependent on Russia, and now you have decoupled, Poland could step in and allow for you to maintain, refit, and enhance the existing weaponry you have. This becomes a problem from Azerbaijan's lens because it leads to capacity building for Armenia. So these are very simple examples in a multilateral relationship your partners can provide that otherwise you would not be able to do at the same level. So it's not as if Azerbaijan attacks, France is going to send special forces, Poland is going to send troops.
I think we need to move beyond that.
We need to move beyond that, right?
Absolutely.
But what it also does is it allows for capacity building. Now, what's in it for these countries? Clearly, it adds to power projection where India could claim that it has influence and a presence in the South Caucasus. And this also allows India to claim that they are deterring Azerbaijan and possibly Turkey from interjecting themselves in the India-Pakistan conundrum. Right? It allows Poland to say we're not just a East European power, we also have important presence in Russia's southern flank, right? So our interests are also being protected. It allows France to make the point that they've been talking about strategic autonomy for 15 years, right? And as a rising European power, they are contributing to peace and stability in the South Caucasus. So there are a multitude of ways where the strategic interests of our partner countries, right, within this unilateral arrangement are served, while at the same time offering a layer of protection and strengthening Armenia's security architecture.
Nerses, what are the next practical steps Armenia needs to take to move this proposal from concept to reality? If you were able to, convince the powers.
So, right. What you always do is you develop a working group, right? So let's say, we take this proposal, this concept, right? And we present it to our French, Polish, and Indian partners. I have very little doubt that this would be of immense interest for them.
Okay? You have little doubt.
Little doubt. Mm-hmm. Because with this also comes things like intelligence sharing of technological knowledge. And because all these countries already bilaterally have these arrangements, when you create a broader framework, it just basically enhances their capabilities and their capacities as well. So why wouldn't you do that? Right? That's one. So first you will develop a working group. You do a proposal. Your partner countries, potential Quartet countries, agree to forming a working group. Once you establish a working group, then you start addressing on what the terms of this unilateral arrangement will look like. Armenia, for example, may ask 10 things. The Indians will come back and say, no, let's settle on these 7, right? And then the French might come back and say, no, let's do these 4 main things. And the Poles would be like, all right, everybody, let's kind of settle on these 5 or 6 things and form the multilateral arrangement. So you develop a working group, right? And you develop an understanding of what the specific securitized interests are, what this is going to look like, what each country's interests are in it, right? And then you come to an understanding. So a working group that proceeds to negotiate and come to an agreement on what the alignment of interests are. Once you have that, then you go to the implementation stage. And the implementation stage, basically based on what the arrangements are, will determine how quick this happens. But usually when you have an agreement on what the multilateral arrangement is supposed to look at, because you're not engaging in institution building, because this is not a multilateral structure, the implementation stage becomes a lot quicker.
Well, Nerses, as always, you're always introducing new concepts, new ideas, innovation in Armenia's security sort of domain and foreign policy. And in this case, it's minilateralism, something that was very interesting for me as well. So thank you, as always, for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.